Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Preh, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. Monday mailbag, getting up a little later than normal, but hey, it's President's Day weekend, and I think we all just took an opportunity to sleep in here for a second. Rough week for the men's basketball program, rough week for the women's basketball program, and yet a good week for the football program. I think we're going to touch on kind of all three of those topics on the mailbag.
Yeah, I was just saying before we started recording, I really like the variety of questions today. We have 4 of them we're going to answer, 3 football, and then the last one's like a 3-parter about men's and women's basketball that allows us to kind of talk about big picture stuff. So I thought that was a good one to end on. But we're going to start where I think probably most listening would like us to start, with the question from @PrincePuddles. What's the impact of Chase Cota in the wide receiver room this year? Depth is an issue, but given the level of talent still on the roster, how much could we see him play in 2022? #Autzen Audibles. Again, a perfect usage of #Autzen Audibles. Everybody that asked a question used the hashtag. For those unfamiliar, Chase Cota was a very highly regarded top 150 recruit out of South Medford about 4 years ago. Ended up signing with UCLA. I think it's probably up for debate what happens if there's not a coaching change there, about where he would have landed. He might have ended up at Oregon originally. But needless to say, I think this is a big addition. We've been kind of talking for a while about, okay, what's going on at receiver? Do they have enough bodies? Do they have the depth? Do they have veterans? And Cota accomplishes that. He's not, I don't think, the highest event player. I mean, you look at his production at UCLA, he had some pretty good games. I think he had like 155 yards and a couple touchdowns and 19 against Washington State. But after that, no 100-yard games, some decent showings against good competition. But this is a player who obviously provides depth. I think potentially could push to start. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of that competition now on the outside between Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin, and Cota. And I might include like an Isaiah Bravard as maybe an outside chance to at least challenge for a spot. But I don't know, guys. I think Cota was a player that's certainly needed. I don't think anybody is under the assumption he's like going to be a game breaker, that he's going to lead the team in receiving yards or anything like that. At least that's not my expectation. But I think you needed to find a player or two at receiver based upon the depth. We've talked about this for a while, and it took Oregon a little longer than it took with a couple other position groups. You think of how they addressed corner, which they got done by the time they signed the class. Boom, they'd added about 3 or 4 guys. Receiver took a little longer, but I think Cota's a player who comes in and you expect he's going to make contributions right away in 2022.
He's automatically the leading receiver on the team for Oregon in career receiving yards, which I think speaks to the volume of production that Oregon lost this past offseason, because Cota has just 67 career receptions for 883 yards. So there was not a lot of talent coming back, or I should say there wasn't a lot of on-field production. There's certainly a ton of talent. There's certainly a ton of potential, but this was a position group that didn't have a lot of on-field success returning in 2022. Cota helped fixes that. He had 1 career game with over 100 yards. That came this past season against Washington State when he went for 4 catches for 147 yards and a touchdown. So he's only had 1 game where he's gone over 100. He's had 3 other games where he's finished over 60 yards, and 2 of those came this past season as well. So it'll be curious to see. I don't think he's going to be a guy that leads the team in receptions, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's number 2 or number 3. And it wouldn't surprise me if he starts a majority of the season for Oregon at 2021 or 2022.
Yeah, this isn't a guy who you expect to be the number 1 receiver on this team. Yeah, this is someone who provides a lot of depth, who provides experience, who can, teach the younger guys, and Franklin Thornton and Chris Hudson. I like the move a lot. I think we've all been on this podcast clamoring for Oregon to add more wide receiving depth. They got it in Justice Lowe in the class of 22, and they get it in here in Chase Cota. They could probably still use another wide receiver or 2, just because behind Hudson, Franklin, and Thornton, you really don't have a lot of players who have even in-game experience, really. So that's a bit of an issue going there. Maybe Seven McGee makes the full-time return or the full-time transfer to slot wide receiver and helps him out there. We'll see eventually, which kind of will ultimately bring us into our next question. But I like Cota. I like his game. Erik, you brought it up, but class of 2018, Willie Taggart doesn't leave Florida to go to Florida State. There's probably a good chance that he ends up at Oregon already. And the other thing about Cota is that he's never really stayed healthy for UCLA. He had 1 year where he played in over 10 games. That was 2019 in his sophomore season. Obviously, 2020 is a shortened season.
Right.
So they couldn't have played 10 games regardless. But he didn't play over 10 games this year, and he played in 6 or 7 in his freshman year in 2018. I think this is a player who, if he's healthy, can be a really, really good impact player. I don't think he's going to go get you 7 for 100 every game. But I think everybody, and I think the coaching staff would be happy if he got you 4 for 50 almost every night. 4 receptions for 50 yards. I think that'd be great production. I think he can open up the middle of the field, open up a lot of slot stuff for Seven McGee or himself. I know he plays primarily outside for UCLA, but UCLA's wide receiver attack is a little different than what we kind of anticipate Oregon's to be, with a more traditional outside receiver in Thornton or Franklin. But overall, I like the move. I've seen a lot of people questioning just kind of like why make this move right now. Oregon needs depth. They have a lot of talent at wide receiver. I like who they have in terms of potential, like Matt was saying, but they don't have any experience. And if somebody goes down with an injury, which is almost guaranteed to happen because we're talking about football here, you need a player like that who can come in and at least fill some of that gap in terms of production. And I think Cota can do that. I think if there's an opportunity out past spring ball for Oregon to pick up another wide receiver with experience, I think they should do it just because of, again, the depth chart overall, and not have to maybe rely on turning Brian Addison into a wide receiver again. But overall, I think it's a good move. I think it's a solid pickup for Oregon and should help them down the line.
We should note, for those maybe unfamiliar, he's a legacy recruit. His dad, Chad Cota, started with the Ducks in the mid-'90s, was a safety, played in the NFL for a handful of years. His cousin, Brady Breeze, I think anyone listening to this podcast is probably familiar with who that is. Dakota, that is his cousin. Dakota's Jared. Well, there you go. Jared is learning as well as we roll through this. The Cotas, the Breezes, that family there has provided some pretty darn good Ducks. And I know, Chase, we're getting him for 1 year at Oregon, but I think the anticipation is he's somebody who can contribute. And frankly, when he was coming up in 18, Matt can attest to this, this was one of the better wide receivers the state had seen in several years.
A long time.
Big physical guy who actually, I think, surprised a little bit with his athletic kind of tools, with his speed, really good route runner. We'll see what he's able to do at Oregon. But as we said, I think this is a necessary move, and I don't think any of us are under the expectation he's going to lead the team in receiving probably, but I think there's certainly room for him to, like Matt said, maybe he starts most of the games. And if he doesn't start, I think he's one of your top 4 guys without question. I don't think unless someone else really develops, I would be stunned if he's not somebody who's one of your 4 guys that plays the most. So I think it was a necessary move, and I like the move. All right, moving on with the question from @DucksCruise. What are you most looking forward to in this year's spring game? #Autzen Audibles. Have we talked about the spring schedule on a podcast, Matt? I'm trying to think.
I don't think so.
Okay. So
it starts real soon.
I was going to say, spring ball starts on March 10th, which I'm pulling up my calendar is like 2 weeks from now. So get ready. And then they will go through, I think about a handful of practices go on spring break, which has become kind of the norm, at least at Oregon, under a couple previous staffs. Reconvene, and then conclude with their spring game. And I didn't prepare to have this in front of me. Is that April 20th? Is that correct?
23rd.
23rd, yeah.
Okay. Spring game on April 23rd. So we're talking about something that's way down the line here, but I have a couple of thoughts here in terms of what I'm most looking forward to. How about just what this stuff looks like schematically? Like, first off, like 2 new coaches, coaching the offense and the defense. Kenny Dillingham coaching the offense. Dan Lanning will have his fingerprints all over the defense, but technically Tosh Lupoy is your coordinator. Really curious to see kind of what those, what they look like on each side of the football. What kind of tendencies or differences we learn. Hopefully we're able to watch practices. We haven't got any confirmation on that. My expectation is that will be the case. And I'm also curious to see, I think another thing that stands out every spring, I'm talking spring as opposed to spring game, but we'll get there, is players playing different spots. Where do they see players playing? Like a Seven McGee is a great example. Is he a running back? Is he a receiver? Is he both? Jackson Powers Johnson is somebody who I know there's been talk about defensive line. Is that where he sticks? Does he move back to the offensive line? Brian Addison has been a player we've talked about, as I think suggested maybe he could play receiver. Is that an angle they go with? Dan Lanning even suggested they could get creative in the backfield at running back with moving some players around. Will we get some sort of inclinations on what that might look like? I just think there's a lot from a position perspective that you get excited about, or at least intrigued by, in terms of how they're rotating through. And then obviously, I think, the thing that I always look forward to in this is just seeing who emerges, especially young players. We don't have a full list, I don't think, of all the early enrollees and who that will be, but I'm sure it'll be a pretty large contingent of players. And each spring, we always see a couple of guys really stand out. And sometimes it's not the players that we expect to stand out. I remember a couple of years ago, Jamal Hill showed up, and it was kind of like he was a lesser recruit, and it was pretty clear pretty early, like, okay, this is a guy who's going to be a contributor. Jordan Scott, several years before that, was kind of a similar thing. I think that might have been a fall enrollee. But, you never know in terms of who's going to show up and really turn heads. And I think that's always a thing I'm looking for. And then the other one is obviously just quarterback play. I think it's the big question for everybody is kind of, how much of these true freshman guys improved? How much is Ty Thompson improved? How much is Jay Butterfield improved? Because again, we haven't really seen them play since last fall. In fall camp, we saw a little bit of Ty in some games. We saw even lesser amount of Jay in games. But I still go back to that fall scrimmage that I know Jared and I were at, where I thought Ty Thompson looked like the best quarterback on the field for the Ducks. And obviously he was given very few opportunities after that. I'm curious to see, in a larger sample size in a spring game setting, and hopefully again in spring practices, what his improvements have been. And this is getting to I don't want to jump too much to the next question, but kind of what is Bo Nix? How does that, how does that transition look? I think those are some of the things I'm looking for. And, we talked about some of the position groups we have questions on. I'm sure it'll be good to get some kind of resolutions to, like, okay, who's the team's top pass rusher? Who are the starting corners? We probably won't have total clarity there, but we'll at least have a depth chart to come away with after a spring game, or at least a pretty clear idea of what one might look like. So there's a handful of things that I'm, I guess, most looking forward to from spring football. Really, in general, I'm just really excited to get out and kind of dive into spring ball. Is one of my favorite times of the year. It's fresh. Mm-hmm. Intensity of a football season can be kind of wear on you. Sometimes to have practices and games without stakes are kind of enjoyable. So it'll be fun to get out there and kind of get a feel for what the 2022 Oregon football team looks like.
You covered a lot there, so I'm only going to focus on one.
My fault. I know.
I'm only going to focus on one area because you touched on a lot that I was going to bring up. That's what I was going at with that.
Right.
And it's the offense for me because there's a lot of layers here. I think because recruiting moves in a much quicker step now than it had 5 years ago. We're hearing, quarterbacks would like to be, committed in end of spring, early summer. And we know some quarterbacks even that are in the 2024 class want to be decided on where they're going to school going into their junior year of football. So the recruiting element of this has sped up. And I think this is one of the rare instances in spring football where it might be beneficial for Dan Lanning and offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham to show a little bit more than you normally would in a spring game and in spring practices when recruits are here, obviously, to showcase what this offense will be because we have no idea. And that's not a negative right now, but from a recruiting perspective, recruits want to know, what am I running? What does your system look like? What is it based off of? And coaches can say all they want, whether it's at Oregon or anywhere else, hey, this is what we want to become. This is what we want to do. This is our plan, and map it out on paper. But until a player, until a parent, until a high school coach, a 7-on-7 coach, until a transfer actually sees the results on the football field, it's all just talk. And so for me, I want to see what the offense looks like so that we have an idea going into the 2022 season, because that shapes the entire narrative of what the player personnel Oregon has on that side of the football. And it will also benefit in recruiting, because then they can legitimately go out and showcase to recruits, this is what we're trying to do, and this is where you would fit into this. And you don't want to wait until September to be able to show prospects where that fits.
I mean, there's a whole bunch that I want to go find. But kind of like you, Erik, spring football is like my favorite thing to cover, because there's like no ramifications for how it goes. It's not like the fall season where there's a game on Saturday, so you can't go watch any practices. But yeah, it's just a bunch of fun. So I'm really excited to watch that in the first part. Offense in general, I'd like to see what their offense really looks like under Dillingham, because we got a glimpse of what Moorhead might provide for the 2021 season. But I'm still under the impression that we didn't actually get to watch exactly what Joe Moorhead wanted to run at Oregon. There were still elements of the pistol, and I cannot wait for that to be out of Oregon's offense for the most part. I'm sure there might be one or two plays, but good Lord, get rid of it.
Jared, I'm under the impression we're not seeing the pistol again. I don't think we see it.
Pray to the Lord that we never see the pistol again in an Oregon offense, because I think that was a brutal decision. And clearly that was, that's why I'm under the impression that Moorhead couldn't actually do what he wanted to, because Jim Mastro's pistol was still implemented in the offense. But so I'd like to see what happens when you have a head coach that's totally defensive minded, who recruits offensive recruits, but doesn't do anything on the offense, and just lets his coordinators do their actual job. So that'll be fun to watch. Quarterback room. This will be more in the next question. Spoiler alert of how good Bo Nix looks, how good Ty Thompson looks, how good Jay Butterfield looks. I'd like to see what the running back room looks like. Just has Cardwell, has he improved in shape, something like that? Not that he wasn't in good shape to begin with, but what does he look like now? What does Sean Dollars look like now? Jordan James, how does he look? Could he be a guy who is in the impact? We just went over the wide receiver room. Offensive line, I don't think that there's a lot to really think about there, since most of the guys are returning. I think we pretty much know what that's going to look like, maybe other than just how Adrian Clem is a teacher and how he is as a coach, and keep an eye on that. Even after all the offensive stuff I just went through, I am most excited to watch the defense work, because I think, the idea is that under Dan Lanning, the defense should be Oregon's bread and butter for the next couple of years. So I want to see how Mario would coach the offensive line, and how he would make them like his little babies. Like, I want to go watch Dan Lanning go coach linebackers, and want to watch him work with Noah Sewell and Justin Flo, see what they do with Jeffrey Bassa. It just kind of, what it looks like with Oregon's new defense, and him and Tosh Lupoy and Demetrius Martin. Like, there's some really good defensive minded fellas over there. And so that's what I'm most excited to watch, honestly. I'd really like to see who can step up in the pass rush, because I don't think Oregon has a number one guy right now. Brandon Dorlus is their best interior guy, and Braden Swinson's probably their best outside guy. I don't know if that's a recipe to replace the production that Kayvon Thibodeau could provide, but I'm willing to watch. I'm willing to see what they come up with, and maybe they just send Noah Sewell and Flo on some more blitzes. But I'd also like to keep an eye on the Jaleels in the backfield if they are those early enrollees, and see what they look like, and see if they could compete at a freshman level. How Bridges and Dante Manning have improved. There's just a whole lot, but overall, like, I can't wait to watch how the defense works.
I know I said like 1,000 things, and
I did more.
You was competition. Well, let me one up.
Yeah.
No, but please. I was just gonna say, I do think one thing I will be curious to see is how involved Justin Flo can be in spring practice. I know that was they pointed to him being the previous staff pointed to him being available in spring, but I'm still really excited by what the combination of Noah Sewell and Justin Flo can look like. And so if we get a chance to see that in the spring game, because remember, we've seen that for like all of 4 quarters.
I think we'll be able to see Sewell and Flo in the spring game. At baseball media availability, Justin Flo was, coming out of the weight room for a workout, and he looks to be in great shape. It's clear that he went through a full workout with no limitations. I think the last time we all saw him, he was still on a scooter or using crutches to get around. There's none of that. There's no limp, no anything like that. I think he's about as full go as full go gets before contact right now.
It's a great sign. I'm just excited to see those two play next to each other. We haven't really had an opportunity to, and I hope that's something we get to see in the spring. All right.
Real quick, I think it's interesting that what kind of gains will this team make from a strength and training position? Yeah. Because 2020, they were very limited in what they could do from a weight training and a speed training standpoint, because they were not in Eugene. They were all at home because of COVID and the season on and off again. And then 2021, they probably couldn't just jump right into their normal strength training routines because of the long delay that came with the off season of 2020, which this is just me spitballing here, which probably could be an indication of why there were so many injuries. They didn't have a normal off-season training to prepare for the season. So now that they have one this year, this off-season, that would be something just spring, but also by August when we see this team for fall camp, of just what does a full off-season of training entail for this team.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one, Matt. I'm happy you brought that up. I'm also excited to see the punters and kickers, but I'm probably alone.
Of course you are.
All right, third one.
Five-star transfer, Andrew Boyle.
No, I'm so excited to see kickoff specialist Andrew Boyle at work.
Oh man.
Third one from @BFOTAF1. What is the ceiling and what is the floor for Bo Nix and Ty Thompson? # Autzen Audibles. I'm going to include Jay Butterfield in here just because there are 3 scholarship quarterbacks, and I think he's deserving of that. I think we would all. I won't speak for everybody, but I'm under the assumption we would all expect the floor for Bo Nix to be higher than the other two, just based upon his starting experience and what he's done already at this level. I think I just did a story last week predicting kind of the offensive and defensive stats, and it was actually kind of alarming looking through some of Bo Nix's numbers at Auburn, and just, again, high floor, but the ceiling, he's not a guy who's from a production level has ever thrown for more than, I think, 16 touchdowns in a season and more than 2,500 or 2,600 yards. If that's the floor, that's not terrible, but it's not incredible. And I think some of that will improve playing, frankly, just much worse defenses out in the Pac-12 than in the most difficult division in all of college football by a pretty large margin. I think that part has to be said.
Might help.
Might help a little. I think that's a part that maybe gets lost if we're just trying to cherry picking stats, and that was something I kind of came away with looking at that. I still think the ceiling for Ty Thompson is extremely high, and I don't know if that's purely perception wise. I think back to a conversation I think we had in a podcast with Greg Biggins about Ty Thompson and about what his expectation was for Ty in his college career, and he basically said 2021 we weren't expecting him to be ready to be a star, but it was after that, and now we're getting to that after that part, and we're getting into 2022 here, his second year, and again I've said this a number of times. I don't think it needs to be reiterated too many times, but I expect Bo Nix will win the starting job and be the starting quarterback. But I still think maybe the ceiling of Ty Thompson is a little higher than it is with Bo Nix. And maybe that's just the unknown part. And we deal with this in every sport where a lot of times the people's favorite player is the player who people haven't seen actually play because you build up what they can be. And in this instance, Ty Thompson's the highest rated quarterback recruit Oregon has ever signed, the highest to ever enroll. He had some great moments in the spring. He had some great moments in the fall. We just haven't really seen him so far. And I think a lot of people are still clamoring for that. I'm not going to be surprised at all if Ty Thompson, if put into a situation where he is a starting quarterback at Oregon, has a huge and very successful start to his career. But it's going to be a lower floor than what you get from Bo Nix, I think, without question. So there's a roundabout way of me basically saying I think Nix is the higher floor player and Ty Thompson is probably the higher ceiling player. But I will also caveat that with saying that can all be purely perception right now because we really haven't seen enough of Ty to draw too many conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
I think best case, obviously, for Ty is he wins the job, which I think isn't out of the realm of possibilities. I certainly lean with Bo Nix being the front runner to win this job. And I'm certainly a guy that hates doing percentages, but I would probably say like it's probably a 25% chance that Ty wins the job. Or someone other than Ty or other than Bo Nix. Because I don't want to let up on Jay Butterfield because he was a high-profile quarterback as well. I think for whatever reason, the fan base has just kind of assumed Ty Thompson is automatically the best guy moving forward. And he may be, but maybe Jay is better suited for what Dillingham wants to run out of Oregon. I don't know. But I think more likely we're going to see Bo Nix be the starting quarterback. And I think the ceiling for a Bo Nix team is they win the conference. I still think that's a realistic scenario for this team. They're not going to be the favorites. It will be Utah, but they'll be the favorites probably to come out of the North. And in a one-game situation where they play Utah in the Pac-12 championship game or they play USC, it's a one-off, and I think Oregon would have a chance, a realistic chance against either of those two teams. I also think for both quarterbacks, it's probably a realistic scenario where this team wins 8 games in the regular season and they lose 4 times. I don't have the confidence yet to come out and say that Oregon would definitively win the North if it was a Butterfield or a Ty Thompson at quarterback. I think they may win it, but they may have one extra loss to get there. Be like a 9-3 or a 10-2, opposed to an 11-1 or a 10-2 type team from Bo Nix's land. But that's kind of where I land. Like I don't think there's a huge gap in the floor and ceiling, or in the ceiling, but I think there's a little bit of a gap in the floor here.
Yeah, I think that's the obvious answer is that the gap in the floor is big enough to the point where you would probably start Bo Nix if the season started in a week from now. The ceiling is the differential between these two. People forget that Bo Nix was also a 5-star quarterback coming out of high school who went to Auburn. Look, I think he's a solid quarterback. I think when you get into a 3-year starter from the SEC, playing in the hardest division in football, when you have to go against Alabama and Georgia and all those teams every single year, and you get him, I think that's a solid pickup no matter where you are in terms of your quarterback room. I've liked this move since the beginning. It was clear last year, well, at least from an outsider's perspective, that Ty Thompson just wasn't necessarily ready to really get in-game experience when it mattered the most. I know he had a second half against, my brain is slipping right now, when Anthony Brown was injured in the first half. Stony Brook. There we go. I wanted to say St. Bonaventures for some reason, but clearly not. Go Bonnies. So it's clear that Ty just wasn't ready. The ultimate difference maker in this is, well, the two ultimate difference makers in this is, how is Jay Butterfield? Did he get better? And did Ty Thompson get better? Because both of those guys get better. Those are both, highly rated recruits who a lot of people were very high on, who had the pick of the litter of colleges to go to, and they both chose Oregon. And obviously Ty was rated higher than Butterfield because of his potential, his growth, his maturity as a human being, his maturity in his body. Then Butterfield, I think Ty has probably the best arm strength on the team in terms of quarterbacks, including Bo Nix. So if Ty could miraculously shows up and is just worlds better than he was at the end of the season last year, that's a completely huge difference maker in this program. However, the odds of that happening aren't that high. It's really hard to improve in the things that Ty needs to improve on in terms of reading defenses and reading his own offense and making reads in terms of what wide receiver to throw to, having touch on the ball, just by an off-season workout. This requires practice experience, game experience. I think Ty gets thrown under the bus for being a 5-star freshman and not being ready because of other 5-star freshman quarterbacks who were ready, like Justin Fields, like Trevor Lawrence, like Caleb Williams we saw at Oklahoma. So I think the perception that he needs to be as good as those people or those players, is wrong because in case we haven't noticed, like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence were first-round draft picks with Lawrence going number 1 overall. That's hard to do. And those were, if you go through 24/7's all-time high school rated lists, like those guys were in the top 20, right. Both of them. Those are generational talents, as some might say. I think Ty Thompson can be very good, and that's where his ceiling leads you, is that if he gets to that 5-star proximity in terms of talent, he can lead Oregon to a Pac-12 title. But he has to get there first, and it's unfair to compare him to everybody else who was there before him.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just takes time, and in a day of modern information where you get things at the snap of a finger, people can't wait for that. And it might be this year where he's ready, and he and Bo Nix really have a competitive spring camp and fall camp, and Dan Lanning has his first huge decision as a head coach of who to start a quarterback, or it may not. And Bo Nix is just clearly better than Ty or Jay Butterfield. We'll see. I mean, this is all about the waiting game. This is why you play the games. This is why you have practices, to see if these things actually come to fruition. But for now, to go a really long way of answering the question, Bo Nix, high floor, low ceiling prospect. Ty Thompson, high ceiling, low floor prospect. You got to take a risk on him. And if you feel that it's good enough, go for it. I think Butterfield is probably a medium floor, low ceiling guy. I feel like if you put him in, he can step up and play, but I don't necessarily think he's going to lead you to the promised land.
I like what Matt did in terms of attaching some sort of wins and losses to the ceiling and floor, which I don't know if I'm not there what that was the question was trying to get at. I think the ceiling for this team, regardless of quarterbacks, is probably 10 wins and a conference championship. And I don't even know if it's that different between Bo Nix and Ty Thompson, because Nix has the experience part. I just think that the floor is probably 8-4 with Bo Nix, where it might be 6-6 with Ty Thompson. I mean, I hate to say it, but quarterbacks at this age have slip-up games where they don't play very well. I mean, Justin Herbert is arguably the best arm talent, best quarterback to ever come through here. His first game against Washington, Oregon lost by 7 touchdowns.
Oh, man.
And I know the circumstances are vastly different. Oregon was the talent disparity was not a talented team at all that Justin debuted with. And the team Ty Thompson would be surrounded with would be much better. But my point is, it takes some time. And so I think there seems to be some sort of sense that if Ty Thompson is given the keys, the floor is at or similar to what Bo Nix is. I don't think that's the case. And I also think we have to understand there are growing pains. And if hypothetically Ty Thompson was to win the starting job, I'm not going to be surprised at all if it doesn't go very well, at least at times, and the fan base clamors and gets frustrated and tries to write him off, when that's really premature, because that's frankly what we do these days. Is we are extremely critical of whoever plays quarterback, and we make assumptions without the expectation that they can get better. Anthony Brown was the outlier because he was a fifth-year senior, and everybody kind of knew ultimately what he was showing was what he was. There wasn't room for growth. If Ty Thompson does win this job, I just hope that there's some sort of kind of understanding that, okay, maybe he's not incredible right now, but that his ceiling and that is still high and that there's room to grow. So I say that to premeditate potentially like people losing their minds in the fall if Ty wins the job and they lose to like UCLA and Cal or something in the middle of the season and everyone wants to go crazy.
We're pretty spoiled with quarterbacks at Oregon. I mean, just think about how many young guys have showed up and have been really good almost right out of the jump. Obviously, the first that comes to mind is Marcus Mariota as a redshirt freshman. And then a couple years later, Justin Herbert as a true freshman. I think that the lack of years in between those two runs has skewed the perception at this position that it's now become, well, it just should happen no matter who we sign. Like, I don't know if people truly understand how impressive that was for both those guys in almost back-to-back successions to do what they did in Mariota's 3 years and Herbert's 4. That's not normal. And I think that's kind of expected at Oregon, which is a little unfair.
It's a good point. Yeah, that's the context you have to have. And I think that is the context that builds these expectations. All right. We're going to finish it here with the fourth question, but this question has 3 questions, so really it's a 6-question show. This is all men's and women's basketball from @the1llama. I don't know if we're going to allow 3 questions like this usually, but for this show, because these are actually, I think, valid questions, we'll do it. But maybe just stick with 1 question going forward. The first one, and I'm going to toss this right to Matt. Can the men's basketball team win 3 or 4 straight at the Pac-12 tournament to make it to the NCAA? And he asked, what percentage do you give them? And it's just funny because Matt just like 10 minutes ago was like, I hate giving percentages. Give us a percentage, Matt. What are their odds?
It's going to largely depend upon the seeding that they get. They're not mathematically eliminated, but let's just say that they are from getting the number 1 seed. The number 2 seed is still possible. There's a much better chance of it happening than the number 1 seed, but I don't think that will happen as well. They'll need a little bit of help, but the realistic finish here is Oregon could finish 3rd in the seeding, and that's important. It's really important for Oregon to get the 3 or the 2 seed because the team that they would play in the quarterfinal round would be another fringe, much further down the list here, fringe tournament team, a Washington State, a Stanford who's got a really good net ranking for their win-loss record, a Colorado team that's kind of trying to push their way into the bubble at the end of the year. They will play one of those 3 teams more than likely. And it wouldn't be a massive boost, but it would be a decent bump up in their net ranking. And then the second game that they would play would more likely be against USC or UCLA for to get to the Pac-12 championship game, which would then be the Arizona game, more than likely, should Oregon get that far. I think if Oregon gets to the Pac-12 championship game, they're in. It doesn't really matter what happens at that point. Obviously, you want to take doubt out of the equation and just win the damn thing and get in. But getting to the Pac-12 championship game probably would ensure that you're in. But that is assuming Oregon wins its final 4 games of the regular season, at home against UCLA, at home against USC, and then on the road at Washington, and to finish the year on the road at Washington State. 3 of those 4 teams are ahead of Oregon in the net rankings. Oregon should be favored, or they should be a very small underdog in all of them, almost a coin flip. I think there's a decent chance that Oregon goes 4-0. I feel very confident they go 4-0 if they play like they did on Saturday, and that's kind of what Altman talked about. What's made this season so frustrating for fans, for the team, and certainly the coaches is their effort is night and day. They play up and they play down to their levels of competition, like we saw against Cal and ASU. I think this team, if I'm going to say, I'm not going to do a percentage because I'm going to go back to my mindset there. But I think if they get to the Pac-12 championship game, you should feel confident that Oregon will be playing in some game that is attached to the NCAA tournament.
I'll give it a % chance. I'll go out on a limb. I'll give it a 25% chance that they win 3 or 4 and get to the tournament. Just because, well, you have no clue what team you're going to get any given night when the men's team plays. And, well, as we'll answer eventually, neither do you have an idea of what you're going to get with the women's team, too. I mean, Oregon gets absolutely decimated by Arizona State, a team that has been underwhelming all year long. But that's not only did they get decimated on away, but they lost at home to them earlier in the season. That's a team that Oregon should theoretically beat both times and add to their resume. And then they come out and play with their hair on fire against a top 5 team in the country in Arizona. So Matt just outlined what Oregon has for the rest of the season against the Los Angeles schools and the Washington schools. I don't see them going 0-4 only because Washington is an abysmal basketball team this year. But it could easily be 1-3, and then they would have to win the Pac-12 championship to get into the tournament. I have a hard time seeing them get into the tournament at this point, just because they've had countless opportunities to not lose and solidify their profile. And I'm saying not lose to borderline terrible teams like Cal and like Colorado at home, or Arizona State at home. But they haven't done it, which is an extremely disappointing part, because you have seen when they have played really well, like they did against Arizona. And I know that they didn't win against Arizona, but they were in control for most of that game. They beat UCLA and USC on away games in their opposing
Jared
team's
froze.
home floor. Oh no. Did I freeze?
You froze.
Oh no.
You're back now.
Hey, we're back.
We're back.
I was saying that it's extremely disappointing that Oregon is up and down, because you've seen when they've played at their best how good they can potentially be, like at Arizona when they lost, and like at the Los Angeles schools when they won on the road. But I just don't know what I'm going to get from them on any given night. And so for my percent to be high, I would have to be, confident in what I can get every night. And I'm just not at this point. I was, we were on record of predicting the next 10 games a couple weeks ago, and I gave it a 6-4 chance, because I didn't see that they could really outperform how they've been playing recently. And although they did that against Arizona, they did it against Arizona State. And with UCLA coming to town this week, they have to play another game like they did against Arizona to win. And I know they're at home this time around, but how many times have we seen them play like that this year? Twice in nearly 30 games. How am I supposed to be confident in that effort?
All right, second one.
Real quick, I want to touch on one thing, because Jared brought up a good point. Like, how does this team generate the effort, generate the intensity that they showed against Arizona? Because they're going to need it against USC and UCLA. Like, there are the path to the tournament is here in front of them. It's still attainable. The issue, as Jared has brought up correctly, is we haven't seen this team maybe show that they can navigate the waters consistently against really good teams. I think I'm probably a little biased towards the past history of Oregon's teams always figuring it out, and that's probably where my half glass full approach is rooted in, is that I've seen it happen every other year. There's only been one year where they've not done it, and I've kind of had this mindset, well, as long as there's a path there, they'll figure it out. But what I wanted to say was, we've seen it. It's been very low key at Mountain Arena all season long. This team has certainly given the Oregon fan base very little consistency to come in and support this team and to have a raucous crowd. But if there was ever a week where the team needed a fan support, the team needed a packed Mountain Arena, I'm not even saying a sold out, a 9,000, 10,000 people at this game, engaged into this game, it's this weekend. And I think I'm really interested to see what the crowd will be like, because these are two big names. They're two top 25 teams, top 15 teams, I think. The rankings came out where we recorded this podcast. And Oregon's season is literally on the line. I'll be curious to see what the fan support is, because I do believe the atmosphere at Arizona, even while it was against Oregon, helped Oregon, match the intensity that Arizona brought to the field.
That's a good point. I like that. Yeah, no, watching it on TV, Matt was down there. That credit to Arizona. That crowd was raucous and very much into the game, and Oregon didn't fold and played its best basketball.
Yeah.
I think that's notable. You hope that the crowd understands what's at stake right now and hasn't written everything off yet, but we'll see. The support has been very, very inconsistent for both teams. The women's have had probably a little more consistent crowds, but that's also because the tickets are cheaper. Second question from @the1llama: can women's basketball still host NCAA round 1 and 2 games, and what would it take? Yeah, they can still do it. A win over Stanford on Sunday would have kind of solidified things for me. I think that would have acted as the marquee win. Oregon is still in a position where they can absolutely still do it. But that win would have, similar to the Arizona win, solidifying the men's team's kind of at-large status. I think beating Stanford on Sunday would have solidified the women's team's chances of hosting. And for those unclear, I know we've talked about it, but I'll just lay it out. If you're a top 16 team in the country, so a top 4 seed, you host your first 2 games. You play those at your home sites. It's a huge advantage in women's basketball to be a top 16 team. Oregon has been fringe the whole way. I think this upcoming Thursday we will get the latest batch. Oregon was at 16, the last spot, the last time they did this about 10 days ago. I anticipate they're probably not in the top 16 right now. The good news is that unlike the men's side, where there aren't that many teams that will really improve your net ranking, the women's side has a ton that will. And these 2 games at Colorado and at Utah are both top 31 teams in the net ranking. Utah's 25th and Colorado's 31st. Oregon wins both of those games, they give themselves a shot. I don't think it solidifies it entirely, because you have to go to the NCAA tournament and probably get, I think, at least to the semifinals and maybe to the championship game. If they were to win out and win their last 2 games here on the road and then win the conference championship, they could probably still be a 3 seed. I don't think they get to a 1 seed or a 2 seed. I think the teams that are in those spots are pretty solidified unless there's chaos, which could happen. But if they were to win out, they could be a 3 seed. I don't think that's out of consideration. But more likely, because of the inconsistencies that have plagued this team, where on Friday, I know it wasn't a winning effort, but they played, I think, the worst basketball I've seen a Kelly Graves coached team play. And what for me is more than the average fan, because I covered him when he was coaching at Gonzaga. I was honestly I left with like knots in my stomach because it was so hard to watch against California. They were 0 for 16 from 3. This is a Cal team that's 11th in the conference, hasn't beaten really anybody all year, and that Oregon beat by 35 down in Berkeley, and yet it kind of took some late game heroics from Sedona Prince of all people to pull out the victory. And Kelly Graves was livid after the game for good reason. And I thought it was telling and impressive that they came back and played similar to we talked about the men against Arizona. The women's team played inspired basketball and was in full control of the game, even into the fourth quarter. I mean, they were up 10 points with 7 minutes to play, and they didn't score a field goal down the stretch. Some, I would say, iffy officiating, but that's a kind of an unnecessary gripe when you don't make a field goal for 5 minutes. You kind of have to put a ball through the net to, really have that be something that matters. But I still think if Oregon were to win its 2 road games next week at Colorado and Utah, and look, that's no sure thing. Those teams are competitive programs. Those teams are both fighting. They're both kind of on the fringe right now. Those are bubble teams. They both need those games. Oregon wins those 2 games and goes to Vegas and then beats whoever it plays in the quarterfinals. And probably even if it loses in the semis to a team like Arizona, I still think has a chance to host as a top 4. But if they were to beat Arizona and play Stanford, most likely in the conference championship game, then I think you're looking at a very, very good chance of it. I think if they get to the conference championship, that they'll be hosting. But other than that, there's no sure thing. Anything to share?
I think I was just going to say, I think that's the path. I think you put it down pretty easily there. They have to win the next 2 against Utah, Colorado. And Utah's no slouch either. No. I think it's important to remind our listeners, they played Oregon really well when Oregon was at home earlier in the season. I think that was only a 4 or 5 point win for Oregon. They're aggressive defensively, which has given Oregon a lot of trouble this year. See Arizona State. That's going to be a problem for them. And Utah's usually has a good home crowd. They especially have gotten up for Oregon this year and last year. It'll be a tough game for them for sure. But in order for them to host, it's going to take a deep run in the conference tournament for sure. I just think Oregon has given up too many opportunities to have their it's the same thing as the men's team. They're both the same. They've had these opportunities to keep going down the path to success, to an easy NCAA bid for the men's, to an easy NCAA hosting opportunity for the women's. And they just haven't performed when they needed to. And so now that the going gets tough, let's see how tough Oregon gets going, to use the oldest cliche in the book. So a deep tournament run in the Pac-12 should solidify a top 16 seed. The new rankings came out during our podcast, and overall, Oregon is back into the top 25 somehow. But, I think that Stanford performance could be a little bit of a turning point to say, for the team to at least say, we can perform that way regularly. Like this doesn't have to be a special occasion. Like we can try as hard as we did against Stanford every night. I think, Kelly Graves touched on this just a little bit in his post-game press conference against Cal, discussing like having six games in 2 weeks has been hard for the team to prepare in between days. Not a lot of days off for them in this time frame. I wouldn't use that as an excuse, but I would just mention that just to see how this team has developed in the last 2 weeks, and how they have very little time to prepare in between games. But now they'll have a little bit more time and some more rest for players who have been injured in the past, and a deep run is crucial.
All right. I'm kind of okay on the fly here, Matt. Let's talk this through. Do we want to do the third part as like its own podcast at some point? Because the third question is asking us to basically project the rotation for the 2022-23 men's and women's teams. And I'm looking at the clock going, that we could be doing this till 1:30.
Yeah, let's save that, and we will table that discussion here in a couple of weeks, because it is important. We should talk about it, and maybe instead of just projecting the rosters for both teams, let's just bring up the fact that Oregon landed a commitment for men's hoops, which will lead into that projection later on the show, and Brennan Rigsby, a junior college point guard from Northwest Florida State College. Jared, you've covered the team with me. Erik, you've watched this team. I think it's a move that made total sense. They need another guard. It feels like this year's team was burned out at the guard position, especially late in the year, just because they have three, and it's a sport and a style where Oregon plays that they need more like 4 or 5.
Yeah, I think they just needed another ball handler. I think Rivaldo Soars was supposed to be their third or fourth guard, depending on where you're going to slot him. He's just not a great ball handler. And when you play in the Pac-12, which is a tougher conference in America, he's going to face good defenses. And I just don't think that Dana and the coaching staff have enough confidence in him to keep the ball under control when it comes to that. But they run a 3-guard lineup as their starting lineup. So it's not like they bring one of these guys off the bench, off the pine. They're playing them all game long. So I'm not sure how much Rigsby is going to contribute in his first year at Oregon next year. But adding in Dior Johnson as well to a great class, that's 2 more guards. And, that's just going to help in terms of depth and longevity for the course of the season, like you're mentioning, how they're kind of burnt out right now.
And I will just, because we're not going full into the women's basketball, I will just note that there were some pretty significant upcoming season news with Sedona Prince announcing she will return next year, and Niara Siabali announcing she will not. She went through team senior day on Sunday. That was pretty notable. If you're talking, again, I don't want to get into the whole projecting the starting 5 and the roster for next year, because I think that's like a 30-minute discussion in its own right. And I don't want this podcast to be 95 minutes, but I think it's important for the fans who maybe haven't been paying attention to know that Oregon will basically have to retool its front court a little bit with Siabali going, but the fact that Prince returns gives you a pretty direct path of like probably where that's headed, and we can have further discussion about some more on the women's side as well. But to the Rigsby point, just really fast, Is he an elite shooter? I haven't been paying attention because if that guy can hit a 3-point shot, that would be great.
He's 36 on 5 attempts a night.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not bad.
I don't want to say he's an elite shooter like a Mathis was, but like Jared said, he shoots a good clip, and his most recent game he made 6. So he's a guy that has the ability to be a flamethrower, but he's also probably someone who will go a couple games without making one. Real quick, I had a question for you, Erik. Hurst was not acknowledged for senior day. Is that just because it's her 6th year and or is there some kind of possibility she's back next year?
I think there's a possibility both Hurst and Hosendove, who are also both of who were seniors. It's a good question, Matt. And I don't have full clarity, and we didn't get anything from Kelly after the game. But I think if you didn't go through senior day, I think that's telling that you're probably going to go through a senior day next year. So I expect both to be back. It was just Shannon Duffy and Niara Sabally. And this could change. I could be totally off base on this a little bit, but my expectation is that both are back. I know there was discussion of this early on in the year. I just haven't heard anything in the last couple of weeks. Frankly, just one thing that's been kind of notable here is we talk about the women's team playing so many games. We haven't had a midweek press event with Kelly Graves, I think, in 5 weeks, and that's usually where these kind of questions get asked. And I wanted to ask, what's the deal with Niara's future? Because the sense had been for a while, from my perspective, from conversations I had with people, that she was good. This is what the outcome was going to be. We didn't have a chance to ask it, and I wanted to ask on Friday, but they almost lost to Cal, and Kelly Graves was not in a mood to ask such questions. So we basically learned on, I think it was Saturday afternoon via social media, that she would be going through senior day. So hopefully there's more opportunity to talk with Coach Graves about these kind of big picture things, because right now it's been just post game, and it's kind of hard to bring up those sort of topics.
Oregon will acknowledge Will Richardson, Eric Williams, and Jacob Young for their senior day on Saturday against USC. Now, Richardson and Williams both have a year of eligibility if they want to use it. They've been listed as seniors all year. Dana Altman said at the beginning of the year that he felt like this was Will's last season. They've recruited as if those 2 guys will be going pro as well. So I doubt there's a chance that they come back, but just wanted to bring it up that, hey, they have years of eligibility left because of the COVID year, but it doesn't sound like they're going to choose to use them. And they'll probably be acknowledged at Oregon. So it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back on we'll be back on Wednesday with another edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.